Hey guys, it's Libby, and today I'm going to be talking about The Winter's Tale for the Bard Book Club. But before we get into the actual play, a little bit of housekeeping. It is time to determine what the future plays are going to be for the next couple of months. So right now it's September. In October we're going to be doing The Taming of the Shrew, and then I've decided it's about time to get to some history plays. But I want to keep the tetralogies together, and I think it's best to start the history plays with the second tetralogy. But I am going to be taking January off from the Bard Book Club, one, so that I don't have to worry about reading a Shakespeare play during the busy holiday time, and also because there's a lot of obligatory booktube videos that have to go up at the beginning of January, and I don't want to also have to worry about getting a Bard Book Club video up during then, and I don't want to break up a tetralogy. So we're going to do Richard II in February, Henry IV Part 1 in March, Henry IV Part 2 in the month that comes after March, which is April, and Henry V in May. Which means we have November and December to pick plays for. And so I decided I would leave it up to you guys, not completely, because there aren't enough spaces in Twitter polls. So I've picked 3 plays in 2 different categories for you guys to vote on. I'll be doing a Twitter poll, and most Twitter polls are only up for 24 hours, but I will get this up for, if not a full week, then as close to a week as I can. So the first category is plays that Libby's really likes. The plays we've been reading are fine. I don't really hate any Shakespeare plays. Yeah, I think that's true, but I want to do something that I can get properly excited about. So the theme for November is going to be weird plays that Libby thinks are underrated, and those are Measure for Measure, Troilus and Cressida, and All's Well That Ends Well. Yes, the 3 problem plays. I have a certain fondness for them. And then in December, we are going to do one of the big uber famous Shakespeare plays that you probably had to read in high school, so you guys can vote amongst Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. So once again, a link to the 2 polls will be in the description, and if you have an opinion, make it known. Okay, now moving on to The Winter's Tale. I have to say, it has been very interesting reading this play and thinking about it in the middle of the Kavanaugh hearings. If you are watching this many years in the future, this is the week. But Shakespeare didn't know that any of that was going to happen. So let's talk about his play on its own merits. I seem to be starting out these videos with a discussion of what's going on with the title and what's going on with the setting, so that seems like as good a place as any to start. The title and the setting are unusually more bound up in the plot and the stuff I'm going to talk about later in the video, so I'm going to try to not jump ahead too much, but that may happen, and this may be a jumbled mess of a video. But that is appropriate for this play, as I will explain. So, The Winter's Tale. What does that mean? Well, one, it refers to a tale that is told in the winter. But it also refers to sort of an old wives' tale, or the sort of story that is meant to entertain women, children, and old people, the sorts of people who in an agrarian community are going to be cooped up during the winter months, because you can't really do anything, you know, in the dairy or in the fields or whatever. And then in terms of the settings, Shakespeare gives us 2 very distinct settings of Sicily and Bohemia. I know that in the play it's Sicilia, but I feel silly saying that, so I'm calling it Sicily. I'm talking about the island that Leontes is the king of. Now, interestingly, Shakespeare hews quite closely to his source material for this play. Robert Greene wrote a romance called Pandosto. Did I get that right? Yes, Pandosto, which is basically exactly the same story as The Winter's Tale, except with Sicily and Bohemia switched. So it's the king of Bohemia who thinks that his wife is having an affair with the king of Sicily, and then the action moves to Sicily, where we have the daughter of the king of Bohemia who is in love with the prince of Sicily, and then they go back to Bohemia, and we all end up there. This would explain why in The Winter's Tale, Bohemia has a coastline. Bohemia, as we now know it, and probably as it was in both Shakespeare's day and the period in which this is set, which is some vaguely pre-Christian time, Bohemia did not have a sea coast, but Sicily has a lot of sea coast. It's an island, just this coast all around it. And also, as I will discuss at length later in this video, the location where this starts out, which in Pandosto is Bohemia, is a lot more associated with winter. And then the second setting, which in Pandosto is Sicily, is a lot more associated with spring. And it's a lot easier to imagine a cold, wintry, snowy Bohemia in, Central Europe than a cold, wintry Mediterranean island. So why did Shakespeare do this? I'm not totally sure. Here's two theories that I've come up with, which may bear some relevance to the truth. One, Shakespeare wanted to highlight the seasonal differences, and so he chose settings where the seasons are not what you would expect, to make it even more obvious to the audience. Secondarily, there was an ancient king of Sicily named Dionysius who was known as a great tyrant, and Shakespeare may have been leaning on this notion of a tyrannical Sicilian king in his portrayal of Leontes. That's all I got. Let me know if you have any better ideas. Okay, so now let's see how this winter-spring dichotomy plays out in the first two lines. It's a conversation between Archidamus, a Bohemian, and Camillo, a Sicilian. If you shall chance, Camillo, to visit Bohemia on the like occasion whereon my services are now on foot, you shall see, as I have said, a great difference betwixt our Bohemia and your Sicilia. Camillo replies, I think this coming summer the king of Sicilia means to pay Bohemia the visitation which he justly owes him. So we get our first reference to a season. It's this coming summer. So we are not in summer right now. We are in winter. I know there's two other seasons. Roll with me on this one. It's called The Winter's Tale. So Shakespeare has set up this cycle. There's the natural cycle of the seasons, winter flowing into summer, and then there is the cycle of visitations between the King of Bohemia and the King of Sicily. First Bohemia visits, and then Sicily will go visit. But of course, as we know, the King of Sicily never goes to Bohemia, and in this way, time is stopped. The cycle isn't able to turn the next spoke of the wheel. I'm going to do this gesture a lot, I expect, in this video, because of Leontes' great delusion. So we're about to get super creative with time in this play. Time, in fact, will appear at the beginning of Act 4, and he will basically say, hey guys, I do what I want. And so we should expect more allegorical or even dreamlike logic from this play than, reality. So before we talk about how time and seasons get all messed up, let's establish where we are. In what ways is Sicily wintry and Bohemia spring-like? Obviously we do open and it is actually winter when the first three acts are taking place. An association with winter is barrenness. Crops do not grow. There is a lack of fertility. And in this way, the family tree of Leontes becomes at least apparently barren. In the first three acts, he actually loses his son and thinks that he loses his wife and daughter. which means that his family tree is now barren, and also that Sicily, as a nation, doesn't really have the ability to look forward to who its heir will be. So we're in a kind of stasis or dead zone while Leontes is king, and then who knows what's going to happen afterwards. And then Paulina says to Leontes in one of her many excellent speeches, 1,000 knees, 10,000 years together, naked, fasting upon a barren mountain, and still winter in storm perpetual, could not move the gods to look that way thou wert. Now, she says that this isn't going to change the gods' opinions, but Leontes is basically going to perform this sort of penance anyway. And when we meet back up with these characters in Act 5, we see that Leontes has spent the intervening 16 years. We don't know exactly what he's been doing, but we know that the lords of Sicily are concerned about him, and he's presumably been fasting, spending lots of time on his knees in prayer, and probably not naked unless you are willing to pay your actor a whole lot, but not wearing a full complement of clothing, quite possibly. So his skin is more exposed to the elements. And then Bohemia, by contrast, we see in this sort of spring festival of shepherds. There's probably sheep on the stage, fake sheep. Perdita is covered in flowers in her guise as the goddess Flora. And then in the transitional scene, Act 3, Scene 3, we not only have the sort of handing off of the stage from Antigonus, who is a courtier who, follows the rules, does what he's told by his king, to these country bumpkins. And this scene occurs during a storm, which is marking the transition from winter to spring. And storms are also associated with labor, birth pangs, the birth of the new year. And also we have a bear. Eggs are pursued by a bear. Everyone loves this stage direction. I don't really get it. I mean, yeah, a bear eats him. So a bear comes out. What do bears do during the winter? They hibernate. So this bear has probably, I like to imagine, just come out of her den, and she is very, very hungry, and she's gonna eat this whole dude. And I'm not certain that Shakespeare intended this, but I think there is some poetic justice in Antigonus being eaten by a bear, because Antigonus has separated a mother and child, and bears are known to be fiercely protective mothers, and so he's sort of being punished for this crime by nature's emblem of motherhood. And then, of course, when we transition back to Sicily for Act 5, when Leontes greets Perdita, he says, "Welcome hither, as is the spring to the earth." Not too hard to figure that one out. They are bringing spring from Bohemia back to Sicily so that we can restart the wheel of time. Before we get into what happens when the Wheel of Time stops, I have one more comment on the setting that is not particularly related to the seasons, but is a different sort of dichotomy that's going on, and that is the idea of the country versus the court, or potentially rural versus urban. So obviously, Bohemia, all of the scenes are set in a field, in a pastoral setting, in a shepherd's house. The king is there, but he's disguised himself in peasant's clothing, etc., etc. And then in Sicily, all of our scenes are in the court in the city. Well, I say city, but it's really just a court scene. All of the people we see are court-type people, not city-type people. But I think Shakespeare is occasionally drawing on city-type imagery to help his audience, which was largely city dwellers, either exclusive city dwellers or people who split their time between the city and the country, to understand this sort of environment. And he does this through allegories, metaphors involving poison and disease. Leontes compares the knowledge that his wife is having an affair to a spider being put in his cup. He says, "There may be in the cup a spider steeped, and one may drink, depart, and yet partake no venom, for his knowledge is not infected. But if one present the abhorred ingredient to his eyes, make known how he hath drunk, he cracks his gorge, his sighs with violent hefts. I have drunk and seen the spider. And then later, when Camillo is literally ordered to poison Polixenes, there's your image of poison right there, he explains this to Polixenes at first obliquely, saying, "There is a sickness which puts some of us in distemper, but I cannot name the disease, and it is caught of you that are well." So we've got this notion of the poisoning of water and then the poisoning of blood or of the insides of the human body, which is the sort of thing that happens in cities because obviously there's lots of people. Water can get polluted, which then makes people sick. And of course, all of the theaters in London were on the South Bank, so you would have to cross over the River Thames in order to get to the theaters. So you would probably still have pretty fresh in your mind the notion of fetid water. But as I promised, back to this notion of what happens when the Wheel of Time stops. Or rather, not so much stops, but becomes unhinged. Hey! Nova had some important things to say about The Winter's Tale. Hey, kitty. You enjoying the view of the Harry Potter? Want to say hi? I think we can use this concept to address one of the main problems that people have with this play, which is that Leontes becomes jealous crazy fast in the space of honestly, 8 seconds, and then he, thinks about it for a good 10 minutes and decides, yes, I am right. Okay, this is a heavy cat. I need to put you down, Nose. So what I think is going on here is actually a very old literary device, which is when you have a long span of time that you do not want to portray all of in a work of art, in a piece of storytelling, you stick it at the end of this span of time so that you can then start there and move forward. We first see this in the Iliad. The Iliad takes place in the 9th year of the Trojan War, and in, I think it's book 3, Priam and Helen go onto the walls of Troy, and Priam, the king of Troy, asks Helen to point out who all of the soldiers are, the Greek soldiers are, to him, so that he can, know who this Ajax guy is that he keeps hearing about. What are the odds that these men were attacking his city for 9 years and he never went out just to see what they look like? Pretty slim. But this occurs partially for the benefit of the audience, so that they can sort of get a recap of what characters are going to be relevant here. And in the case of the Iliad, I think it's also kind of for the benefit of the poet, who wants to be able to show off his lavish descriptions of the Greek heroes. A similar thing is also happening at the beginning of The Winter's Tale, and that is Hermione asks Polixenes to tell him about his childhood with Leontes. We know that Polixenes has been there for 9 months. Why has he not talked about this before? Why did he not bring up to his best friend's wife, how they got to know each other? He probably would have, but we don't want to start the story all the way back then, so we're just going to do it here in the place which is not as logical as it could possibly be, but serves the story. I think that's what's going on with Leontes. So we see in about 10 minutes what was in fact 9 months worth of ruminating. And it's all condensed here, partially for convenience, but partially because time is wonky in The Winter's Tale. Things happen twice. Things that were supposed to happen at one time actually happen at another time. Events curve back and render themselves undone. Let's get some examples. There are lots. So first in Act 1, Scene 2, okay, I'm gonna read a little bit more of this quote than is technically relevant, but that's only because it's so good. This is from Leontes, and he's speaking to Mamilius. Inch thick, knee deep, or head and ears a forked one. Go, play, boy, play. Thy mother plays, and I play, but so disgraced a part, whose issue will hiss me to my grave. There's some great equivocation on the word play here, and I want you to get used to equivocation, because when we get to Taming of the Shrew next month, we are going to drown in it. So first he tells Mamilius to play. Mamilius is a child, go play childish games, that context of play. Then he says, thy mother plays. And in this sense of the word play, he's talking about like flirtation, like sex games. And then he says, and I play too. And we sort of wait to see what context he's going to be rendering his playing in, and he's actually rendering it in a third context. But so disgraced a part, whose issue will hiss me to my grave. Leontes is using the word play, meaning as an actor would play. Slight moment of meta-theatricality. He actually is an actor and is playing. But the point that's going on here is that all of this is actually true. Mamilius possibly goes and plays right at this moment, but is about to drop dead and not play anymore. Hermione is not actually doing this flirtatious play, and Leontes is not playing the part. He thinks he's playing the part of a non-cuckold, and he's not playing that part. That's his real life. He is not a cuckold. But these three sorts of playing do all happen, but just later in Bohemia in Act 4. We have the sort of games associated with this spring festival that's going on. We have the flirtatious play between the shepherds and shepherdesses, and Autolycus getting in there a little bit, and between Perdita and Florizel, and then Autolycus plays many parts. He seems to be a man who has no actual reality, but just plays whatever is needed for the scene, whatever is needed to get him some cash. And in a production that I saw of A Winter's Tale, The Winter's Tale, they had a very small cast, and all of the parts were doubled. And the guy playing Leontes also played Autolycus, which sort of brings up the notion of which of these men is more wrong? Which of these men is doing a worse thing? Is it the man who believes what he is doing is right, but he is in fact doing evil, and he's doing it publicly where everyone knows that he's doing it? Or is it the man who is just doing little tiny evils, but he is doing them with full knowledge that what he is doing is wrong, and covertly? This notion we will visit again in Measure for Measure whenever we get to that. Another indication that we get that time is all messed up comes from Cleomenes. He and Dion were the Sicilian lords who were sent to the oracle at Delphi, which is in Greece, to see what the oracle had to say regarding Hermione's guilt or innocence. When he comes back, he says, speaking of Delphi, the climate's delicate, the air most sweet, fertile the isle, the temple much surpassing the common praise it bears. So he's describing quite a pleasant, mild climate. It seems like the rest of the world has already gone on with spring, while Sicily is still mired in winter. And then there's one of these events that sort of plays out twice, and that is Polixenes being separated from a family member. He tells Hermione that he and Leontes were like brothers, and that they wanted to be boy eternal in this sort of pastoral idyll. I imagine this occurring in Bohemia rather than Sicily, but it doesn't really matter. And they wanted to be able to live like this forever, but then puberty happened and they were like, actually, I think I might like to get married. In this case, we have an instance of the wheel of time flowing as it should, as, you know, boys become men. We talked about this with Claudia, the transition from the homosocial world to the heterosexual world. So this happens first between him and Leontes, and then it happens again between him and his son Florizel. Again, they are inhabiting the Eden-like kingdom of Bohemia, and then Florizel decides to leave because he has a pretty lady. And although Polixenes tries to stop him, you can't stop time. Except when you mess up really bad, like Leontes. Bringing Autolycus back up again, he is sort of a Lord of Misrule type figure. So the Lord of Misrule is someone who would be appointed in a community during the Christmas season, who could like be all jokesy and pull pranks and stuff. And this Christmas season was sort of a time of reversals. Where the servants would be served by the lords of the manor or whatever. It works out differently in different types of communities, but there's a sort of topsy-turviness which Autolycus is embodying in The Winter's Tale, but he's in the spring setting. He's bringing this wintry upset to the spring, which is supposed to be like clean and fresh and orderly. And we can see this in that the members of the court of Bohemia, the prince, the king, and Camillo, who's a courtier, have disguised themselves in peasants' clothing, and meanwhile Perdita is reigning as queen of the festival. Of course, the real reversal is that Perdita is a shepherdess in the first place instead of a princess, which she actually is. And then there is what I think is the most interesting jumbling of time, and that is the fact that there is a relationship between Florizel and Perdita. So people comment that these two people look a lot like their parents. Florizel looks a lot like Polixenes, and Perdita looks a lot like Hermione. And it's possible that the actors who were playing young Polixenes and young Hermione at the beginning of the play for the first 3 acts then become Florizel and Perdita, and they get older actors to play older Polixenes and older Hermione. And so if these are, kind of the same people, then Leontes is technically right that there is a relationship between a Polixenes type dude and a Hermione type lady. He just was wrong by 16 years. Maybe this is why he is so gosh darn convinced of it. This is a world in which oracles exist and people can, in theory, see the future. Maybe he's seeing the future, but he thinks he's seeing the present. Food for thought. And then the finally wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey bit is that Paulina ends up married to Camillo. At the beginning of the play, she's married to Antigonus. It is possible and may have been the original intention to have Antigonus and Camillo played by the same person, in which case she's just getting married to the same guy again. But even if you're not doing that, these two parts are sort of doubled. Camillo and Antigonus are both given orders by Leontes to do heinous crimes, to functionally kill someone. And Antigonus doesn't like it, but he does do it. He does take Perdita to be exposed, which in the ancient world was a death sentence anywhere outside of a story. If you're in a story and you get exposed, you are definitely going to survive and prove to be royalty later. In the real world, if you are exposed, you're just going to get eaten by a bear. Camillo, on the other hand, when he is ordered to kill Polixenes, is like, actually, no, I'm not going to murder somebody. I'm going to run away. And I know it may seem like I have painted a picture of this wildly fantastical play of all of these weird things happening where time has stopped and then we move around in it differently, and that's on top of all of the stuff that you probably noticed for yourself about how fairy tale like this is. We've got an evil king, we've got a prince falling in love with a commoner, but she's actually a princess in disguise. All of this is the silliest and the least real stuff that's happened in a Shakespeare play. Surely let me make you think harder about that, because this is Shakespeare and nothing is easy. Some things are easy. The ending of A Winter's Tale is not, though. So let's compare The Winter's Tale to the other 2 plays we read. It's almost like I planned this. Let's compare it to Othello and Much Ado About Nothing and see what happens when you accuse your significant other of cheating on you. In the real world, if you did this and you were real mean to them, what do you think would happen? Do you think everything would be fine by next week, as it is in Much Ado About Nothing? Do you think you would just start murdering people like in Othello? Or do you think you would feel really bad when you found out you were wrong and suffer for a long time? And some things would be irreparably broken, but potentially you could heal this relationship and end up together again. I think that while the trappings of the romances are certainly less realistic than the comedies, the romantic comedies, or the tragedies, it allows Shakespeare to create a more real scenario. Okay, I'm about done, but I just want to leave you with information that will be helpful to you in reading many of Shakespeare's other late plays. And that is that this is sort of the first puzzle piece that we're getting in Shakespeare's concept, or his notions of forgiveness, and what does it take to earn forgiveness. Spoiler alert, you can't earn forgiveness. It can only be given to you freely. We'll see this come up again in Measure for Measure, in The Tempest, in The Merchant of Venice. So yeah, pay attention when characters are in need of forgiveness in Shakespeare. And on that note, I will leave you, and I will be back next month to talk about The Taming of the Shrew.